I didn't mean to become the kind of adult who keeps a paper diary like a 13-year-old at summer camp. It just happened last year, in the thick of a breakup that made my apartment feel like a museum of small betrayals. I started writing because it gave shape to the fog, because it forced me to pick up my feelings and choose verbs and nouns for them instead of letting them drift. I wrote on a soft, heavy notebook that my aunt gave me for work notes. It had a linen cover the color of storm clouds. I labeled it Meeting Notes, Q3, so nobody would mess with it. I thought that was clever. I thought that was enough. When I moved in with Danny in the spring, Danny with the cheerful hair claw, and the fern that kept dying, then resurrecting. Danny who liked sunflower mugs and bite-sized candies. They immediately clocked the notebook in my hands during the first week. Corporate, they teased, half pleased, half joking. We're doing synergy in this house? I laughed because I thought they were nice and harmless and maybe the closest thing to a friend I'd had in months. We found the apartment in a hurry, a 2-bedroom in an old building that leaned a tiny bit like it was eavesdropping on the sidewalk. I liked the slant. I liked the narrow windows and the way the late light seeped in determined as syrup. We signed fast. Danny said, "We're going to make this so cozy you'll never want to go outside again." I believed them. It became cozy in the way that living with another person defines cozy. We had our routines. Danny worked nights at a bakery and came home every morning, dusted with flour, drumming their keys on the counter while the coffee dripped. I worked from home, and my boss liked scheduling meetings at odd European hours that made my brain tight with static. The notebook lived on my desk, open during the day for actual meetings because I'd learned the hard way that if I didn't keep a decoy purpose, someone would ask to see it. If a thought pierced me mid-spreadsheet, if I remembered how my ex used to make omelets like origami, or if I felt a smear of jealousy when a friend got engaged, or if I just wanted to write down a sentence I overheard in the elevator, I would switch pens and write slanted in the margin, my handwriting leaning away from the neat meeting columns like it was embarrassed to be there. "New apartment rule," Danny announced one evening in May, throwing themselves on the couch and kicking off their shoes. "We do a weekly dinner where we cook something risky, like we try to make hollandaise and see if it turns into a sauce or a science experiment." "I don't have the patience for hollandaise," I said. "I'll make grilled cheese." "Grilled cheese is not risky," they said, but they looked pleased. Later that week, we both got drunk on cheap white wine and made burnt, gorgeous grilled cheeses with caramelized onions and too much butter. And I wrote in my notebook that night, "I'm not exactly happy, but I'm not cracked open anymore. I am, maybe, suturing." I didn't lock the notebook. I didn't hide it very well either. It lived on a shelf near my desk when I slept. Sometimes I left it in my tote bag if I took a walk. I told myself that the trust was part of the healing. How romantic to be a person who believed in people again. I even wrote about Danny sometimes, how they hummed little nonsense songs while washing dishes, how they would squat in the hallway to whisper to the fern, "We're going to keep you alive this time, I promise, baby." I wrote about their disarming kindness and the way they tended to carry grief like a folded umbrella, ready at all times. You can see where this is going, even if I couldn't then. It started small. One morning, Danny was in my doorway when I came back from a run, cheeks pink, breath uneven. They asked too casually, "How did your call with your mom go last night? You okay?" I blinked. I hadn't told them about calling my mother because the call had been the kind where she wanted to talk about the ex. "Any updates? Have you reached out?" And I'd hung up feeling like someone had rearranged all my furniture while I was sleeping. I'd written about it in the notebook afterward, the sentence jagged. "I can't tell if my mom wants me to go back because she loves me or because the story makes sense to her." "How do you know I talked to my mom?" I said, toweling sweat down my neck. Danny shrugged, too quick. "You always FaceTime in the kitchen. I heard your voice." But I hadn't. I'd stayed in my room, door closed, because I'd wanted to keep the conversation small, controlled. The explanation slid around, oily, but I let it pass. The way you let through a car when you don't want to get in a fight at the four-way stop. It was easier. Danny beamed at me the way only Danny could beam, open and blameless. "I'll make pancakes," they said, and I let the question evaporate in the syrup. Then, a Tuesday afternoon in June, a storm so heavy it stapled the sky, I was on a Zoom call with my manager and three other people I'd never met in person. I'd left the notebook closed on my desk because I didn't trust the urge to write a single vulgar word across the entire page about how I hated being asked to circle back. The call ended. My laptop fan spun down. The apartment sounded fat with rain. I went to the bathroom. When I came back, the notebook sat open to the middle of the month, the pale ribbon marker displaced like a tongue. For a second, I thought I had left it like that. I really did. We are so good at letting the ordinary cover the sinister like a sweater thrown over a stain. But then I saw that the page was folded back in a way that I never do, a sharp crease like a dog ear. My mouth went dry. I picked it up. The crease marked the entry where I'd written, in a mood halfway between confession and theater, a list titled Things I Am Ashamed of Wanting. It included to be forgiven without doing the work, to kiss someone who likes me more than I like them, to have my old life back without the bad parts, to be told I'm good. The kitchen floor creaked. Danny, on their day off, passed my door, and the smell of their orange shampoo arrived with them. They didn't knock. They never knocked. "Hey," they said, and then they saw me holding the notebook and the particular stillness on my face, the silence that falls right before a glass tips off a table. "Oh," they said, soft and high, "I was going to ask you about, well, maybe we should talk." The notebook in my hands weighed more than the rest of the room. "Talk about what?" Danny's mouth did a peculiar thing, like they were trying to smile and button it shut at once. "About, they said, with a flippant flick of the wrist that didn't match their eyes. "About the stuff you wrote. About me." I didn't remember writing anything bad about Danny. I had written observational things, that their generosity sometimes felt like a spotlight that made me squint, that the way they narrated every small act, "I'm putting the plates away, I'm feeding the cat I don't have, was both endearing and exhausting. I'd written that once, when they'd surprised me with cinnamon rolls at 2 a.m. after a late shift. I'd cried in the bathroom so they wouldn't see, because the sweetness made me miss someone who used to put a cold hand on my cheek and say, "Sleep now." I didn't write cruelty. I didn't. I wanted to be the kind of person who didn't. "What are you talking about?" I asked. My own voice sounded like a tape recording, thin, warbly. Danny crossed their arms. "You wrote that I'm manipulative." The word hit me like a doorframe I didn't see. I let the notebook drop onto the bed. It opened somewhere else, another entry. Danny took a micro step into my room like the floor had pushed them. "You said I keep score, that I use favors to make people owe me, that I'm, what did you call it, hungry to be necessary." I stared at them, at the damp edges of their hair, at the way their t-shirt had a flower fingerprint near the hem. Ghostly. I remembered the sentence. I had written it after the hollandaise grilled cheese night, when Danny, tipsy and warm, had told me their secret dread, that if they weren't useful, they'd be disposable. I had written, "It scares me how much Danny's love language is labor, the way they shovel help at me until I can't tell if I'm being fed or buried." I hadn't meant it to be a verdict. I meant it to be a way to see the shape of a thing I didn't know how to hold. "You read my diary," I said finally, the facts assembling themselves despite my embarrassment. "You went into my room and you read my diary." Danny's chin lifted with this brief, wild conviction, like the head of a snake meeting sunlight. "It isn't a diary," they said, pointing at the cover. "It says Q3 meetings." "I don't care what it says," I said. I heard myself trying to keep my voice steady, like I was talking down a skittish horse. "You knew what it was." They didn't back down. "I didn't go snooping," they said. "It was open, which," they gestured, palm up, helpless. "Look, it doesn't matter. What matters is that you were writing these things about me and then acting like we're friends." A rush of heat shot up my neck, so fast I had to sit down. My legs didn't trust me. "We are friends," I said, even though the word began to feel like a bridge lifting up as we stood on it. "Then why didn't you say this to my face?" Their eyebrows knit in a way that made them look painfully young. "Why write this underground list of sins and just keep living with me like everything's cute? Do you know how that feels?" "I know how it feels to have my privacy violated," I said, and my voice broke on the last word, which felt too big to fit in my mouth. "I know how it feels to have you stand in my doorway and throw quotes from my own head at me like knives." Danny flinched. Outside, thunder spoke so close to the building that it rattled my water glass. We stared at each other across the carpet, the notebook slack on the bed between us like a witness who refused to testify. The kitchen light had been left on. It cast a pale trapezoid across my floor. The fern in the hallway tilted toward it, greedy, alive. "Okay," Danny said after a long minute, their voice small. "Okay, maybe I messed up. But you wrote more than just that." They swallowed. "You wrote about the money too." I felt my blood drain. "What money?" Danny's eyes didn't blink. "The deposit," they said, and then they took a breath like a diver about to plunge. "And the part where you said you thought I didn't deserve to be on the lease." The storm went silent for a breath, like the sky wanted to hear my answer. I couldn't breathe for a second. The words hung there between us, and all I could hear was the quiet drip of rain against the window pane. I'd forgotten I'd even written about that. No, that's not true. I hadn't forgotten. I just tucked it into the back of my mind, like a paper cut you keep pretending doesn't sting until someone touches it. The money, the deposit, the thing that still made my stomach twist every time I thought about it. "Danny," I said slowly, "what exactly did you read?" They looked at me with a kind of offended dignity, like I had no right to be the one asking questions. "Enough," they said. "Enough to know that you think I manipulated you into covering most of the security deposit, that I'm some kind of freeloader who guilt-tripped you with my broke artist sob story. That's what you wrote." My face burned. I remembered the night I'd written it, barely 2 months ago before the diary had started to feel like a limb. We were sitting on the floor of the empty apartment, eating takeout noodles from the carton because we didn't have furniture yet. Danny had told me their credit card was maxed out, that payday was still 2 weeks away. I had fronted the full deposit and first month's rent because I just wanted to move in, wanted stability, wanted to believe this new life could start clean. They'd promised to pay me back, but the money hadn't come yet. I'd written about it because I was worried, because I didn't want to fight about money, because I wanted to be understanding, but I was tired of being the responsible one. "I didn't mean it like that," I said, my throat tight. "It wasn't an accusation. It was just—" "What?" Danny snapped. "Just you venting your secret little opinions about me? Just you journaling your judgment so you can feel like the reasonable one in your own head?" They weren't yelling exactly, but every word landed hard. I felt like I was shrinking in my own room. "Danny, you read something that wasn't for you," I said more quietly this time. "It wasn't a letter. It wasn't something I was ever going to show anyone. You can't hold it against me like I said it to your face." They threw up their hands. "So you can write whatever you want about me, and I'm not allowed to be upset because it was private? Do you even hear how crazy that sounds?" "It's not crazy to expect privacy in my own home." The volume of my voice startled both of us. Danny froze for a moment, eyes wide. I took a breath, but it trembled when it came out. "Look," I said softer, trying to pull the air back into the room. "I get that you feel hurt, but you crossed a line. You invaded my space. You don't get to be the victim here." Something flickered behind Danny's eyes. Anger first, then shame, then something like hurt pride. They opened their mouth, then closed it. When they finally spoke, their voice had gone cold and flat. "You think I don't know that?" they said. "You think I wanted to see that stuff? I was just— God, I don't even know. You left it open, and I saw my name. And I thought, maybe you'd written something nice. I thought we were friends." The room went very still. They wiped a hand across their mouth and laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. "You know what's funny? I've been sitting here for months thinking you're the only person I can trust. I tell you everything. I bring you croissants after my shift. I feed your stupid sourdough starter when you forget. And meanwhile, you're in here writing that I'm manipulative." "I didn't call you manipulative," I said. "I wrote that I felt manipulated sometimes. There's a difference." "That's semantics," they muttered. "No," I said firmly. "It's the whole point. Feelings aren't facts, Downey. I was trying to understand mine." They looked at me, and something in their expression softened. Just a fraction, but enough that I saw the person who used to sit on the couch with me watching dumb baking shows at midnight. The person who'd made the apartment feel like home for the first time in years. Then they shook their head and said quietly, "I don't think I can live here if you secretly hate me." I closed my eyes. "I don't hate you," I said. "I never did. You're twisting this into something it's not." "I'm twisting it. You're the one writing novels about how broken I am." The words hit like a slap. For a moment, neither of us spoke. I wanted to say something, anything to fix it, but the air between us had turned to glass, fragile and sharp. Finally, Danny turned toward the door. "You know what?" they said, voice trembling just enough to betray them. "I need space. Don't talk to me right now." They left the room. The sound of their footsteps clipped and furious. The front door slammed a few seconds later. I sat there staring at the open notebook on the bed. The ink looked darker than it had when I'd written it. Like the words themselves were ashamed to be caught. I wanted to cry, but I couldn't. I just felt numb. That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I replayed the conversation. The way Danny's voice cracked when they said they thought I was their friend. The look on their face when they said I secretly hated them. I'd written hundreds of entries in that notebook. Some about Danny, some about my job, some about the breakup that still haunted me. It was my sanctuary, the one place where I didn't have to explain myself. And now even that felt tainted. Around 2 a.m., I got up, turned on my desk lamp, and flipped through the pages. I read the entry Danny had mentioned, the one about the deposit. My handwriting slanted unevenly from exhaustion. The line said, "I don't know if I'm being kind or a doormat. Danny promised to pay me back, but I'm scared they won't. And I don't want to bring it up because I like them. And I don't want to lose another person over money." That was it. That was the awful thing I'd written. I closed the notebook and pressed it to my chest. I wanted to rip out the pages, to burn them, to erase the evidence of every ugly thought I'd ever had. But I also knew that wasn't fair. Thoughts weren't crimes. By morning, I heard the sound of Danny moving in the kitchen, cupboards opening, plates clinking, the low hum of the fridge. I hesitated before stepping out. They didn't look at me when I came in. They were making toast and their movements were mechanical. "Morning," I said softly. They didn't answer. I tried again. "Can we talk?" They sighed, still not looking at me. "I don't have time. I'm going to work." Their tone was clipped, polite in a way that hurt more than yelling. "Danny," I said, "please, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have written about you like that." That made them pause. They turned, eyes red-rimmed. "You don't get it. I'm not mad about what you wrote. I'm mad that you could think those things and still look me in the eye every day, like we were fine." Their voice cracked on the last word, and it broke something inside me. "Because I wanted us to be fine," I said, almost whispering. "I was trying to keep peace. I didn't want to dump my insecurities on you." They shook their head, grabbed their keys, and walked past me without another word. The door clicked shut behind them, and I realized with a slow, sinking dread that maybe there was no fixing this. The apartment felt emptier than it ever had before. It wasn't even the silence that got me. It was the way the air itself felt hostile, like the walls knew what had happened and were waiting for me to admit it out loud. I kept expecting Danny to burst through the door again, to yell, to cry, to do something. But they didn't. They just left, and the absence sat beside me like a body cooling after an argument. For the next few days, everything was mechanical. We existed in the same space but lived on separate planets. Danny would come home from their shift around 6 in the morning, and I'd already be awake pretending to answer emails. I'd hear them take a shower, the steady rush of water through the pipes, then their bedroom door would close. I started moving differently, quietly, politely, as though I were a guest in my own apartment. I tried to write again, but every time I picked up a pen, my mind went blank. The diary sat there like a crime scene. I couldn't open it without feeling watched, without hearing Danny's voice echoing in my head. "You wrote about me." On the third day, I finally sent them a text. "Me, can we please talk when you get home?" I hate this. I watched the typing bubbles appear for a second, then vanish. They didn't reply. I thought about writing a note, something long and apologetic and honest. Something that explained that the diary wasn't about judgment, it was about survival. That I was trying to process my fears so they didn't leak into real life. But that felt pathetic somehow, like trying to rewrite the ending of a movie after the credits had already rolled. That evening, I heard the door open. I was sitting at the kitchen table, picking at leftover pasta I couldn't taste. Danny came in with grocery bags, looking exhausted. I stood up, heart pounding. "Hey," I said. They didn't answer right away. They started unpacking the groceries, eggs, flour, chocolate chips, probably supplies for the bakery. Finally, without looking at me, they said, "What do you want to talk about?" I took a breath. "I don't want things to stay like this." "They don't have to," Danny said flatly. "I'm moving out next month." It was like the floor tilted under me. "You're what?" They finally looked at me then, eyes hard but wet around the edges. "I talked to a friend from work. She needs a roommate. It's closer to the bakery anyway." "You're leaving because of this?" "Because of you," they said, not cruelly, just tired. "Because I don't feel safe being around someone who writes about me behind my back." I wanted to argue. I wanted to tell them that they were the one who invaded my privacy, that I was the one who should feel unsafe. But the words caught in my throat because, deep down, I knew that wasn't the point. "I didn't mean to hurt you," I said. They nodded once. "I know you didn't mean to, but you did." The finality in their voice hollowed me out. We stood there for a long time. The only sound was the soft buzz of the refrigerator and the occasional honk from the street outside. Then Danny sighed, set the groceries down, and said quietly, "You know what's messed up? I keep thinking about all the nights we stayed up talking. How I told you things I've never told anyone. My dad leaving, my panic attacks, all that crap. I thought it was mutual. I thought we trusted each other." "We did," I said quickly. "We do." They looked at me with something like pity. "No. You wrote about me like I was a project, like you were studying me." I felt sick. "That's not true." "Then why did you write that I make you feel fed or buried? What does that even mean?" "It was a metaphor," I blurted, which sounded stupid even to me. "I was trying to understand why I sometimes feel smothered when people care about me. That's not your fault, it's mine." Danny let out a small, bitter laugh. "You sound like a therapist trying to excuse a serial killer." I wanted to scream, "You read something that wasn't yours." But I didn't, because they already knew. And maybe, just maybe, they were right to be hurt, even if they were wrong to read it. They finished putting the groceries away and said, "I'll pay you the rest of what I owe by the end of the week. I don't want to owe you anything when I go." "That's not what I care about," I said. But they were already walking away. The next week was a blur of avoidance. Danny started sleeping at their co-worker's place half the time. When they were home, they'd shut their door and play music low enough that I couldn't make out the words, just the muffled pulse of bass. Once I heard them crying, quietly like they were trying to be polite about it. I kept rehearsing what I'd say if I could get them to listen. I'd tell them that I'd written those things because I cared, not because I didn't. That the diary wasn't full of judgment, but fear. Fear of being too much or not enough, of ruining another friendship like I always did. But the words never left my mouth. Then one night, I came home late from running errands, and Danny's door was open. Their side of the room was half empty. Suitcase on the bed, clothes folded in piles, the fern already gone. They were sitting cross-legged on the floor, packing books into a cardboard box. They looked up when I entered, and for a brief second, the exhaustion fell away. "Hey," they said quietly. "Hey," I said back. We stood there in silence for a moment. I glanced around the room. It already didn't look like theirs anymore. "I didn't think you'd be moving this soon," I said. "They had an opening earlier than expected," they said. "It just made sense." I swallowed. "So, this is it then?" They gave a small shrug. "Guess so." I took a step closer, unsure if I was allowed to. "Can I just say one thing before you go?" Danny sighed but nodded. "I never meant for any of this to happen," I said. "I didn't write those things to judge you. I wrote them because I didn't know how to talk about them, because I'm not good at being honest when I'm scared. You meant a lot to me, Danny. You still do." They looked down at the floor, jaw tight. "Then why didn't you just say that instead of writing it in secret?" "Because writing was easier," I admitted. Talking felt like tearing open a wound. Writing made it feel like maybe I could make sense of it. For a second, I thought they might forgive me. Their expression softened, almost imperceptibly. But then they just shook their head. I hope you figure that out someday, they said, because not everyone's going to give you the benefit of the doubt. I felt tears prick my eyes. You're right, I said. I know. Danny stood, grabbed the box, and paused at the door. For what it's worth, they said quietly, I shouldn't have read it. I know that was wrong. I'm sorry for that. The apology should have made me feel better, but it didn't. It just made me sadder. Goodbye, Danny, I whispered. They gave me a small, almost invisible smile. Take care of yourself, okay? And then they were gone. That night, the apartment felt like an echo. I sat on the floor of their old room, surrounded by the faint smell of their shampoo, staring at the outline of dust where their fern pot used to sit. I thought about deleting the diary entirely, burning it, shredding it, anything. But instead, I went to my desk, picked up my pen, and opened to a blank page. I wrote, "Today, Danny left." I don't know who's more to blame, me for writing, or them for reading. Maybe both. Maybe neither. All I know is that I feel like I lost something I didn't even realize I needed. And then below that, I wrote one more sentence. Maybe some doors don't slam. They just close quietly and you don't notice until the light's gone. When I finished, I sat there for a long time, staring at the words. And then I heard it, the faint click of the front door. Someone was back. For a heartbeat, I thought I was imagining it. The soft metallic click, the creak of the hinges. It was late, past midnight, and I'd been sitting in the dark with nothing but the faint hum of the fridge and my own heartbeat for company. But then came another sound, the shuffle of shoes against the mat, a bag sliding to the floor. I stood up too fast, the diary still in my lap. "Danny?" I said into the quiet. My voice sounded small, uncertain. There was a pause, then a low, hesitant, "Yeah, it's me." I walked out to the hallway. Danny was standing by the door, half lit by the yellow glow of the streetlight through the window. They looked different. Their hair was damp, their sweatshirt rumpled. They didn't look angry, just tired. "I thought you moved out," I said. "I did," they said with a weak smile. "I forgot a box of stuff. Figured I'd grab it tonight before work tomorrow." Their voice was calm, almost casual, but something about it made my stomach twist. This wasn't the same tension-filled Danny who'd left. This was someone who'd already put a wall between us. "Your box is in your room," I said quietly. "I didn't touch anything." They nodded, brushing past me, and the familiar smell of orange shampoo and flour drifted through the air. For a moment, it felt like nothing had changed. Then I caught the glimpse of my desk in their peripheral vision, and I saw their eyes flick toward the diary. I followed their gaze and quickly closed the notebook, pressing a hand over it. "Still writing?" they asked, voice soft but unreadable. "I'm trying to," I said, "but it's different now." They didn't say anything to that. They just walked into the empty room and crouched beside the box I'd set against the wall. It was full of random things, cookbooks, a pair of sneakers, a small ceramic frog they'd found at a thrift store and insisted was lucky. When they lifted the frog out, they smiled faintly. "I forgot about this guy," they said. "He used to sit on the windowsill," I said automatically, before realizing how much I sounded like someone reminiscing about a dead pet. Danny chuckled softly. Then the sound faded. They stood up, holding the frog in both hands. "You know," they said, "I've been thinking about everything that happened." My throat tightened. "Me too." They nodded slowly. "I was mad. Still am. A little. But also," they sighed, "I think I get it. I keep journals too. Just digital ones. I'd probably lose my mind if someone read them." The words hit me like warm water after months in the cold. "You would?" "Of course," they said. "That's the one place you're supposed to be completely honest, even if it's ugly." I exhaled shakily. That's all it was, Danny. Just honesty in a place where no one could get hurt. "I know," they said, "but you were right too. I shouldn't have read it. I think I wanted to confirm something, like that I wasn't the only one afraid this friendship meant more to me than it did to you." My chest tightened. "You think I didn't care?" Danny's eyes flicked up to mine. "I think you didn't know how to show it." That stung, mostly because it was true. I'd always struggled with saying things out loud. Love, anger, fear. It was easier to write them, to confine them to ink and paper where they couldn't ruin anything. I never wanted to lose you, I said. I just didn't know how to keep you. They set the frog down on the counter. Maybe that's the same thing. We both laughed a little, but it came out shaky, brittle. After a while, Danny said, "You know, when I read what you wrote about the deposit, I felt so betrayed, like you'd been keeping a tally in secret. But then I realized, I've done that too. I've kept lists in my head of everything I've done for people, like it made me worthy of love." "That's what I meant," I said quietly. "That's what I was trying to write about. Not you, me. How I keep getting tangled in people because I want to be seen as good." Danny looked at me, and there was something almost like forgiveness in their expression. "You ever notice how most people aren't actually mad about what's written? They're mad it's true?" I smiled sadly. "Yeah, I guess that's the risk of being honest, even with yourself." For a moment, we stood there in the empty apartment, surrounded by half-packed boxes and ghosts of conversations that used to fill the air. I wanted to ask them to stay, to try again, to rebuild whatever we'd broken. But the words caught somewhere behind my ribs. Instead, Danny picked up the box and said, "You'll find another roommate, someone less nosy." I laughed softly. "I doubt it. You set the bar pretty high for chaos." They smiled at that, a small flicker of the old warmth. "Keep writing," they said, heading for the door. "Even if it scares you." "I will," I said. "And I'll try to say things out loud more too." They paused in the doorway. "That'd be nice," and they said gently, "Take care, okay?" When the door closed this time, it didn't slam. It clicked softly like punctuation. I stood there for a long time, listening to the quiet. Then I went back to my desk, opened the diary, and started a new entry. Danny came back tonight. Just for a box, but maybe also for closure. We talked. Not enough, but maybe enough for now. I think forgiveness isn't one big thing. It's a series of small, fragile understandings. And I'm starting to understand that being known is scarier than being hurt. I paused, pen hovering above the page. Then I added one more line. "If someone ever reads this again, I hope they see that I was trying." I closed the diary, exhaled, and finally felt something like peace settle in the room. But just as I turned off the lamp, I noticed something tucked halfway beneath the edge of my desk. A small folded note. It wasn't there before. I froze. The note was folded neatly, almost deliberately, like it had been left for me to find at exactly this moment. The paper was cream-colored, torn from one of the small notepads Danny used for grocery lists. My heart started pounding as I reached down and picked it up. For a moment, I just held it between my fingers, feeling the faint grease stain in the corner and the indentation of handwriting pressed deep into the paper. It wasn't sealed, just folded in thirds. I hesitated before opening it, half afraid it would be something cruel. Some final accusation they hadn't wanted to say to my face. But curiosity, that awful, tender part of me that always wanted closure, won out. I unfolded it slowly. "I didn't mean to hurt you either. I was angry because I saw myself in what you wrote. The part about needing to be necessary, that's true. I've always been terrified of being replaceable. You didn't do anything wrong by writing it. I was just scared you were right. Don't stop writing. I hope you find someone who reads you the way you want to be read." D. I sat there for a long time, staring at those words until they blurred. My first instinct was to cry, but the tears didn't come. Instead, what I felt was this strange, aching calm, the kind that comes after a storm finally exhausts itself. I ran my thumb over Danny's handwriting. It was slanted, sharp at the ends, the same way they talked when they were trying not to show emotion. I could almost hear their voice in the words, half apology, half exorcism. I wanted to text them, to say thank you, or sorry again, or maybe just send a dumb meme like we used to. But I didn't. I knew that would just reopen something that needed to stay gently closed. So instead, I tucked the note into the back pocket of my diary and flipped to a new page. "It's strange," I wrote. "You can live with someone, know the sound of their footsteps and the way they hum when they stir coffee, and still not really see the parts of them that matter. Maybe that's what diaries are for, Not to record events, but to capture the invisible parts we're too afraid to say out loud. I paused, then added, maybe Danny was right. We were mirrors for each other, and neither of us liked what we saw. After that night, things shifted, slowly, quietly. The apartment stayed empty for a while, but not in a bad way, more like a breath being held. I started rearranging things, moved my desk to face the window, donated the extra chair Danny had bought, replaced the dead fern with a small cactus. I began writing again every morning, not because I needed to escape my feelings, but because I wanted to understand them. Sometimes I'd think about Danny when I cooked, especially on those nights I made grilled cheese with too much butter. I'd find myself smiling, remembering the way they used to pretend to critique it like a judge on a cooking show. Presentation, tragic. Flavor, divine. A few weeks later, I got an envelope in the mail with no return address. Inside was a Polaroid, me and Danny on move-in day, sitting cross-legged on the floor surrounded by boxes, holding up greasy takeout cartons, and grinning like idiots. On the back, written in black pen, was just one line. It was cozy, wasn't it? I laughed out loud when I read it, that kind of laugh that breaks through a lump in your throat. I put the photo on my bookshelf, right next to the diary, and life went on. I found a new roommate eventually, a quiet girl named Nora, who loved plants and respected closed doors. We got along fine, not the way Danny and I had, but maybe that was the point. One night, a few months later, I caught myself writing about Danny again. Not about the fight or the hurt, but about the way they had once saved a dying fern like it was a friend. The way they filled every space they entered with this restless, unfiltered kindness. And as I wrote, I realized something. The diary hadn't ruined my friendship. It had just revealed what was already fragile between us. Two people trying to be known, both terrified of being misunderstood. That thought stayed with me. I wrote it down. Being known isn't safe, but it's the only thing that makes us real. When I finished, I closed the notebook and set it aside. For the first time in months, it didn't feel like a wound. It felt like a witness. Later that week, I saw Danny again by accident. I was in line at the bakery downtown, half awake, scrolling on my phone. When I looked up, they were behind the counter, flour dusted across their forearms like snow. For a second, I froze. They saw me too, and instead of awkwardness, there was just this soft, wordless recognition. They smiled, small, genuine. "Hey, stranger," they said. "Hey," I managed, smiling back. They rang up my order, handed me a croissant, and said, "On the house." "Old habits die hard," I teased. "Maybe," they said with a half shrug, "but this one's worth keeping." We didn't talk about the diary. We didn't talk about the fight or the note or the night they left. It didn't need words anymore. When I got home, I opened my notebook again and wrote, "Some people leave and come back not to stay, but to remind you that you both survived it." And that felt like enough. In the months that followed, I started to notice how quiet peace actually sounded. It wasn't the silence that had filled the apartment after Danny left, tense and brittle, a vacuum of everything unsaid, but something gentler, a hum almost, the kind that comes when you've stopped waiting for an apology or a second chance and started learning to live with the truth of what happened. I still wrote in the diary every day. Some entries were long and winding, others were just a few words scrawled between emails or coffee breaks. But the act of writing had changed. I didn't write to hide anymore. I wrote to understand. Sometimes I'd find myself rereading old entries, especially the ones from before the fight. There were days where Danny's name appeared again and again, little snapshots of friendship, jokes, observations. Reading them now, I could see the story of our unraveling begin long before the blow-up. All those small misunderstandings, the unspoken expectations, the ways we'd both wanted to be seen but not examined. There's a line I wrote early on, before things got messy. Trust isn't about keeping secrets safe. It's about knowing what not to touch. I underlined it twice. I didn't know then that it would end up being the moral of the entire story. By late autumn, the apartment no longer felt haunted. I'd filled Danny's old room with a secondhand bookshelf and a small writing desk. Nora had moved into the spare bedroom, and the sound of her plants being watered in the mornings became its own kind of comfort. Life had rhythm again. And yet, every once in a while, I'd catch a flicker of the past. A scent of orange shampoo in the grocery aisle. A certain playlist that still made me think of lazy afternoons on the couch. The two of us arguing about whether cereal counted as soup. I didn't miss Danny the way you miss someone you want back. I miss them the way you miss a chapter of your life you can't reread without wincing. One night, sometime in November, I was journaling with a cup of tea and the windows fogged from the cold. I'd been thinking about the last time I saw Danny at the bakery, how easy that smile had felt, how final it seemed. And then I remembered something. The note. I pulled it from the back of my diary and unfolded it again. The paper had softened at the creases. The ink had faded a little, but the words still hit the same. I hope you find someone who reads you the way you want to be read. That line sat with me. I started wondering what it actually meant. Was it about finding someone who would understand me, or someone who would respect the unreadable parts? I wrote in the diary, maybe what I really want isn't to be read perfectly. Maybe I just want someone who won't steal the book when I'm not looking. A few weeks later, I found out through mutual friends that Danny had started taking writing workshops at the community center. I laughed when I heard that. Of course they did. Of course the person who'd once accused me of turning them into a character had become a storyteller themselves. I didn't reach out, but one evening, scrolling through social media, I stumbled on a short post they'd written. It wasn't directed at me, but I knew. It said, sometimes you hurt someone because you looked for yourself in them and didn't like what you saw. Forgiveness isn't about letting it go. It's about learning to look again. I stared at it for a long time. Then I clicked like. It was the smallest, quietest truce imaginable, but it felt like enough. That night I wrote something new. Not about Danny, but about what had changed in me. I used to think privacy was a wall, something to hide behind, but maybe it's a door instead. You can open it, let people in, or close it when you need to. What Danny and I had wasn't ruined by what was written. It was ruined by forgetting to ask for permission before walking through. The next morning I went for a run, the way I used to back when the whole mess started. The air was cold, sharp enough to wake me up completely. The sky was pale and washed out, the kind of winter light that makes everything look fragile. When I came back, I brewed coffee and sat by the window with my notebook. This time, I didn't write about regret. I wrote about possibility, about how strange it is that something as small as ink on paper can change the shape of your life. About how maybe we never really lose people. We just carry their outlines with us, stitched into our language, our habits, our hearts. I signed the page with the date and closed the book. And that's when I noticed something I hadn't before. The cover was starting to fray at the corners. The gray linen had worn soft from all the times I'd handled it. I ran my fingers over the spine and thought about how many versions of myself were tucked inside. The scared one, the angry one, the forgiving one. For the first time, I didn't feel ashamed of any of them. That weekend, Nora asked me if I wanted to come to the farmer's market with her. I almost said no. I'd been planning to stay in and write. But then I thought of Danny, of how they'd always pushed me to get out of my head and actually live in the world I kept trying to analyze. So I went. It was an ordinary morning, the kind that doesn't make it into anyone's diary. But as we walked between stalls, the sunlight cutting through the cold, I realized that was okay. Some parts of life are meant to be written down. Others are meant to be lived. Winter came and went quietly that year. By the time spring crept back in, the apartment had changed in small, invisible ways. The air smelled different, fresher, lighter. Nora had filled every spare corner with leafy green plants that soaked up sunlight like it was gossip, and I'd started writing at the kitchen table instead of behind closed doors. It was strange realizing how much my habits had softened. I didn't guard my thoughts the way I used to. I still wrote privately, yes, but I'd stopped treating my diary like a vault. It wasn't a weapon or a refuge anymore. It was just a mirror, a kind one. One Saturday morning while Nora was out visiting her sister, I sat by the window with my coffee, the diary open to a half-filled page. The street below was alive with the sounds of a city waking up. Bikes whirring past, a dog barking at pigeons, the faint jingle of an ice cream truck playing out of season. I started writing about forgiveness again, about how it never really arrives all at once, but trickles in like light through dusty blinds. I'd forgiven Danny long before I admitted it to myself. Maybe even that night they came back for the box. Halfway through my thoughts, I heard the mail slot clatter. A small envelope landed on the floor. I set my pen down and picked it up. There was no name on the front, just my address and handwriting I recognized instantly. Danny's. My stomach did that weird fluttery thing it always did when the past reached out unexpectedly. Inside was a single piece of paper, folded once. Hey, we just finished the first writing workshop at the center. Our instructor asked us to write about the thing we once misunderstood most. I wrote about us. I didn't use your name, but I told the truth. You were right. You and I were both trying to be seen without being known. I hope you're doing okay, and I hope the diary's still being honest with you. D. I sat there for a long time after reading it, staring out the window. The letter wasn't long, but it felt heavy in my hand, like it carried the weight of everything we'd both learned separately. I smiled. Then I opened my diary and started a new entry. I got a letter from Danny today. It wasn't an apology or a plea, just an echo, a small reminder that some connections don't need fixing. They just need time to stretch and reshape themselves. I paused, tapping my pen against the page. Then I added, I think we've both grown into people who could be friends again someday. But maybe the lesson was never about keeping each other. Maybe it was just about learning how to hold space for others, for ourselves, for the messy truth in between. As I wrote, the door opened and Nora came in, her arms full of groceries. She grinned at me. You writing another bestseller in there? Just life, I said, closing the notebook. Well, she said, tossing me a peach from the bag, make sure I get a good chapter. I laughed, catching it clumsily. You already are one. That night, after Nora went to bed, I sat at my desk and reread some of my earliest entries. Before Danny, before the fight, before I learned that privacy and honesty weren't enemies but partners. I realized how much I'd changed, not because of what I'd written, but because I'd been forced to face it, because someone had cracked open the one place I thought was untouchable, and instead of breaking me, it made me rebuild. I reached the final blank page and hesitated. The whole book had become a record of my learning, about trust, vulnerability, forgiveness, and the courage to be seen. I wanted the last words to mean something, so I wrote, I used to think being read without permission was the worst thing that could happen to me. Now I think the worst thing would have been never being known at all. I closed the diary. For the first time since Danny had left, I didn't feel like I needed to write anymore. I felt finished, not healed exactly, but complete in a way that didn't depend on anyone else's understanding. I placed the diary on the shelf beside the Polaroid Danny had sent. The two sat there together, evidence of a story that started with a boundary broken and ended with a bridge quietly rebuilt. When I turned off the light, the city outside was still awake. The glow of street lamps spilling through the blinds, the sound of laughter from the bar across the street. And for once, I didn't feel like an observer in my own life. I just felt here. Spring eventually gave way to summer, and life fell into an easy rhythm again. The kind that doesn't feel like recovery anymore, just ordinary living. I got better at being around people, at actually saying things out loud instead of saving them for the page. Nora and I started having friends over for dinner every couple of weeks, and sometimes when the night got late and the wine got cheap, someone would ask about the gray linen book sitting on the shelf. What's that? They'd ask. Oh, I'd say, smiling. Just an old diary. I never explained further, and no one ever pushed. That felt right. I still wrote sometimes, but not every day. The new notebook I'd started, plain black cover, no fake labels this time, wasn't for confession anymore. It was for noticing, for the small, beautiful things I used to overlook, the sound of rain against the window, the way Nora's laughter always arrived in waves, the stranger at the cafe who left a doodle instead of a tip. I think that's what growth is, learning to replace survival with curiosity. One evening in early July, I found myself walking past the bakery after work. The front windows were open, warm air spilling out, and there was Danny, hair tied back, dusted with flour as always, arranging pastries in the case. I hesitated at the door, debating whether to go in. They looked up and saw me before I could decide. Their face lit up in that easy, unguarded way I hadn't seen in what felt like forever. "Hey," they called out, smiling. "It's been a while." "Yeah," I said, stepping inside. "I was just passing by." They wiped their hands on their apron and came around the counter. "How's the new roommate? Still keeping all your secrets?" I laughed. "She's better at respecting doors." "Good," Danny said. "Boundaries make the best neighbors." There was no awkwardness now, no tension. Just two people who'd once lived inside each other's bad days and learned how to forgive them. We talked for a few minutes about nothing. About work, about the heat, about how the city smelled like overripe peaches in July. Then Danny grabbed a paper bag and handed it to me. "Take one," they said. "It's the last croissant of the night." I smiled. "Still trying to feed me, huh?" "Still trying," they said. And that word, trying, sounded like a small, private peace offering. When I got home, I made tea, unwrapped the croissant, and sat by the window as the sun sank low and gold behind the buildings. I ate slowly, savoring the sweetness, the faint taste of almond. It felt like closing a circle. Afterward, I opened my new notebook and wrote, "Saw Danny again today. The world didn't break." Maybe that's what forgiveness really is. Not erasing the past, but making peace with the fact that it still exists. Then I flipped back through the pages of my old diary, the gray one, for the first time in months. The entries were uneven, chaotic, filled with things I no longer felt ashamed of. Each page felt like a photograph of a version of me that had been scared, but brave enough to be honest. Near the back, tucked between two pages, was Danny's original note, the one that said, "I hope you find someone who reads you the way you want to be read." I smiled at it, then slipped it into the new notebook, right between the first few blank pages. Not as a reminder of pain, but as a marker of growth. Later that night, Nora came home and found me sitting by the window again. "You look thoughtful," she said, kicking off her shoes. "I'm just thinking," I said, "about how sometimes people come into your life to teach you something you didn't know you needed." "Yeah," she said, pouring herself a glass of water. "What did Danny teach you?" I looked out at the streetlights flickering like tiny promises in the dark. "That being seen isn't always comfortable," I said, "but it's worth it." Nora nodded, smiling. "That's a good one." We fell into easy silence after that, the kind that doesn't demand filling. Before bed, I wrote one final entry in the old diary. "Dear whoever finds this someday, if you're reading it, I hope you understand that every word here was written by someone trying to make sense of themselves." That's all any of us are really doing. And if you ever write your own story, I hope no one reads it before you're ready. But if they do, I hope it teaches you something about what it means to be known. I signed it with just my initials, closed the cover, and that was it. The next morning, I slipped the old diary into a small box, along with Danny's Polaroid and the folded note, and placed it in the back of my closet. Not to hide it, but to give it rest. Some stories don't need to be rewritten, they just need to be finished. As I shut the closet door, sunlight pooled across the floor, warm and quiet. The world outside was already humming with life, full of stories I hadn't lived yet, pages I hadn't filled. And for the first time, I didn't need to write to feel real. I just breathed, and it was enough.